There is a hidden corner within each of us, a space that we avoid, that we pretend does not exist. A dark and dusty room, whose windows have remained closed since childhood. That's where we send everything we don't want to be. The shameful impulses, the forbidden thoughts, the unconfessable desires. This dark corner, Jung called the shadow. But the shadow is not something we can bury forever, because it doesn't die. She waits, grows, notes, and one day, when we least expect it, it returns. It can come as a fit of rage, a cruel word that slips away unchecked, a thoughtless act that destroys what we love most. Or, more subtly, as a nameless sadness, a void that no achievement fills, a persistent malaise as if something inside us was out of place, out of axis, too rejected to ignore. Jung knew that the dark side of personality was not an enemy to be vanquished, but a mirror to be stared at. And that's why we start this dive not with a cold explanation, but with a courageous invitation. Are you ready to look at your own shadow? The shadow is everything we repress to adapt to the world. As children, we find that certain behaviors take us away from love and acceptance. Being vulnerable? Cry? Inappropriate. Get angry? Wrong. Doubting God? Sin. Show desires? Immoral. And so, we begin to hide pieces of who we are. We push our truths into a psychological basement, sealed by layers of shame, fear, and denial. Instead of spontaneity, we learned to wear masks. We create an ideal self, socially acceptable, one that pleases, that fits, that is praised. But the price of this is the internal mutilation of our totality. The shadow, therefore, is not only made of evil. It also carries our pent-up vitality, our freedom stifled, our authenticity forgotten. It is not just about the monster, but also about the wild artist, the forbidden lover, the righteous rebel, the survival instinct that was once silenced. And Jung warns us, one does not illuminate by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. Have you ever felt an inexplicable hatred for someone you barely know? Have you ever found yourself judging someone harshly for something that, deep down, you also do or would like to do? These are indications of shadow projection. What we deny in ourselves, we start to see in the other. The arrogant irritates us because we hide our own vanity. The addict bothers us because we deny our fragility. The sensual offends us because we bury our sexuality. The shadow is like an echo. It screams through the people, the situations, the disproportionate reactions that we have. And as long as we do not recognize it, we will continue to be slaves to it. It is not for nothing that Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you accept is transformed." But what if I told you that there is not only the individual shadow? There is also a collective shadow, formed by everything that a culture, a society, or an era represses in the name of normality. We live in times that glorify success, performance, appearance, control. Therefore, everything that is vulnerable, spontaneous, ambiguous, or chaotic becomes a shadow. Depression, weakness, mistake, failure, doubt, insecurity, questioning the rules, danger. This massive repression makes us sick. We live in a world that is increasingly productive, but also emptier. More connected, but more lonely. More full of stimuli, but emotionally drained. The collective shadow manifests itself in the extremes, in fanaticism, in intolerance, in the unbridled search for meaning, pleasure, or power, but also in art, in the revolution, in those who dare to be different and are rejected until they are needed. Most try to escape the shadow, but Jung invites us to do the opposite. Become who you are by integrating your shadow. This path is not easy. It requires courage to take off the masks. It requires humility to recognize one's own abysses, and compassion not to hate yourself when you discover them. To integrate the shadow is to say, yes, I can feel anger. Yes, I can desire reprehensible things. Yes, I can make mistakes, fall, lie, manipulate. But I'm not just that. The shadow should not dominate us, but it cannot be ignored either. It is an essential part of our psyche. And when recognized, it can become a source of strength, creativity, and authenticity. Denying the shadow is like ignoring the crack in a dam. It does not disappear. It accumulates. The pressure increases day after day until one day it breaks. When we avoid our dark side, we don't become better. We become more fragile, more reactive, more likely to explode or implode. The ignored shadow infiltrates relationships. It hides between the lines. It reveals itself in unhealthy jealousy, in the desperate need for control, in the fear of being abandoned, in the unconscious pleasure of destroying what is good for us. How many times do we sabotage what we want most? How many times do we choose people who repeat our traumas? How many times do we run away from ourselves using the other as a shield? Everything that we do not face in ourselves, we end up living as destiny. The other becomes a mirror of our internal war. Every human encounter is, on some level, an encounter with our shadow. We fall in love not only with what the other is, but with what he awakens in us. The attraction isn't just chemical, it's symbolic. We unconsciously look for someone who carries parts of ourselves that we deny. The sweetness that we do not allow ourselves. The freedom we suffocate. The intensity we fear. The vulnerability we hide. But over time, what enchanted us can become a threat. The same trait that attracted us can irritate us. And then the projection begins. We begin to blame the other for what, in fact, is ours. You're selfish. You control me. You suffocate me. But often, we are the ones who project the selfishness we repress, the control we desire, the suffocation we feel of ourselves. The shadow transforms love into a battlefield. And only when we recognize it is it possible to truly love, not the ideal, but the real. In Jung's language, the shadow is not just a repressed content. It is an archetype, a deep structure of the collective unconscious, present in all human beings. It appears in myths, stories, movies. He is the villain, the monster, the traitor, but also the wise man in disguise, the wounded healer, the severe master. In fairy tales, it is the dragon that guards the treasure. In dreams, it is the dark figure that haunts us. In life, it's that moment when everything falls apart, to be reborn. The shadow is the threshold guardian, the one that tests if we are ready to cross. And it always arises on the threshold of great changes. When a part of us dies, and another tries to be born. To ignore the shadow is not to neutralize it, it is to allow it to act without awareness. It's like leaving a wild animal locked in a dark room for years. One day, he escapes. And the longer he was imprisoned, the more violent he became. That's why, too good, people sometimes have unexpected outbursts. That is why moralists fall into scandals. That is why spiritual leaders, politicians, or even therapists end up being swallowed up by what they condemned. The more we identify with a pure and perfect image, the more we feed the shadow we deny. Holiness is not in the denial of evil, but in the ability to dialogue with it. To look within and recognize, that is me too. But now I see it, and I can choose. The shadow doesn't scream, she whispers. And their whispers appear in dreams, symptoms, impulses, and synchronicities. How many times do we dream of someone chasing us? With dark places? With wild animals? With shameful situations? Dreams reveal what the ego does not want to see. They are symbolic films projected by the unconscious to remind us of the forgotten totality, as well as the symptoms. Anxiety, depression, compulsion, these are often ways for the unconscious to say, you're moving away from yourself. You're living halfway. And even significant coincidences, the famous synchronicities, can be signs of the shadow manifesting in the outside world. The universe tries to awaken us in many ways. But are we listening? The confrontation with the shadow is a rite of passage. It is the crossing of the dark night of the soul. It is the moment when we fall from the pedestal of the image we have built to dive into the ground of our truth. This process hurts. It destroys illusions. It tears up certainties. But it also frees us. Because once the shadow is recognized, it loses the power to manipulate us. And what was once a threat becomes an ally. Anger turns to courage. Sadness becomes sensitivity. Fear becomes a warning. Desire becomes creativity. The integrated shadow makes us whole. Jung did not see the unconscious as an enemy. He believed that the unconscious wants to collaborate with the conscious. He wants to guide us to totality. He wants to heal us. But for that, we need to be willing to listen. We need to pause the noise of the world and listen to the murmurs of the soul. Integrating the shadow is, deep down, an act of love. It is welcoming the exile. It is to hug the orphan. It is to say to our dark side, "You have a place here. I see you. I understand you. I'm not afraid of myself anymore." The shadow, when recognized, ceases to be a threat. It becomes the gateway to something bigger, the process of individuation. Jung called individuation a path of integration and wholeness. It is not becoming someone perfect. It is to become who you are, whole, complex, authentic, contradictory. The shadow is part of this process. It is the raw material of inner alchemy. The lead that needs to be faced, transformed, and purified, so that something higher can emerge. Ancient alchemists believed that raw material hid potential gold. But gold could only emerge if the transformation process was complete. This symbolism inspired Jung to look at the unconscious as a true alchemical work. The shadow, in this context, is the first stage. Nigredo, darkness. The symbolic death of the idealized ego. The descent into the unconscious. The chaos that precedes the light. Only when we accept to enter this darkness does the real gold appear. Expanded consciousness. The self, the unification of opposites. And what is the self if not the divine spark in us? The totality that transcends the ego, but includes it. The one who recognizes, I am light and I am shadow. I am flaw and I am power. I'm human. And, precisely for this reason, I am vast. We live in an era in which everything is filtered, polished, edited. Social media pushes us toward idealized versions of ourselves. Perfect smiles, perfect lives, correct thoughts, exemplary behaviors. But behind the screens, there is suffering. And behind the suffering, there is shadow. The culture of emotional performance has created a new kind of repression, the emotional shadow. Today, it's not enough to be good. You have to look happy all the time. It is not enough to be well. It is necessary to be at peace, to be grateful, to be positive. But where do we put our legitimate anger? Where do we vent our existential anguish? Where do we welcome the internal chaos that we all carry? The repression of the shadow creates a sick society. People who explode for nothing, who attack on the networks out of unelaborated frustration, who project their emptiness onto others, who live in fear of being who they really are. Integrating the shadow today is an act of resistance. It is refusing to live only halfway. It is to opt for the truth, even when it scares. Talking about the shadow is important, but living it consciously is what transforms. Here are some practices suggested by Jung and Jungian analysts to begin this integration journey. Self-observation without judgment. When you feel an intense emotion, envy, anger, jealousy, stop and observe. What is she trying to reveal? Where does this strength come from? Dream analysis. Dreams are messages from the unconscious. Start writing them down. Ask, what part of me is being represented here? Dark writing. Give voice to your shadow. Write as if you were her talking. What does she feel? What does she want? What does she hate? Symbolic acts of integration. Do something that symbolically represents the acceptance of the shadow. A drawing, a ritual, a difficult conversation, a free dance. Jungian therapy or analysis. The encounter with the shadow can be dangerous if done without support. Having someone experienced helps not to get lost in the labyrinth of the unconscious. One of the most powerful ways to find one's own shadow is through the relationship with the other. Jung said that everything that irritates us in the other can be a projection of what we hide in ourselves. Therefore, every relationship is a chance for self-knowledge. The friend who challenges us, the enemy who provokes us, the stranger who bothers us, all are mirrors. But to see, humility is needed. You have to say, what in me reacts so much to this? What can I learn from this mirror? The shadow does not hurt us. What hurts us is not recognizing it. The shadow, when accepted, liberates. It frees the repressed artist, the dreamer ridiculed, the injured child, the frightened warrior. It frees the human being to live with intensity without having to please or fit in. The shadow gives us back the right to be whole, to feel uncensored, to choose with conscience, to love without a mask, to exist without pretense. There is no true freedom without the encounter with the shadow, because while we fear parts of ourselves, we will live imprisoned in them. In the end, the shadow is not a monster to be destroyed. It is a sacred part of us, the one that keeps everything we forget, the one who cries when we betray ourselves, the one that pushes us inside when all seems lost. Jung showed us that the true hero is the one who dares to descend into the hell of his own soul, and it returns with a piece of light. This is the path of individuation, the path of wholeness, the path of those who accept their own humanity. And now, perhaps you can ask yourself, what my shadow wants to show me that I'm not ready to see yet? If you've made it this far, congratulations. That already says a lot about your courage. Most run away from their own shadow. Few have the audacity to face it. If this video resonated with you, like, comment and share it with someone who is ready to dive into this ocean of themselves. And remember, the true light is not the one that drives away the darkness, it is the one that passes through it.